Giles Parker joins us here at Great Missenden. Giles is from Sound Barrier Solutions, a company which designs soundproofing for major transport projects. Simon, welcome to the library.
Good afternoon.
Can you just explain to us the noise impact of a high-speed train line?
Absolutely. Well, if I compare it with, say, a highway where you've got continuous noise, if you live next door to a motorway, generally you'll have like a continuous whooshing sound. The difference with an HS2 train is it's a sudden impact, it's a sudden event, it breaks the silence. And if you talk about impact, you're talking about human perception. And people are far more annoyed by a sudden break in the silence than they are by just an increase in general noise.
But people notice it with this sudden impact of noise because there are going to be up to 14 trains an hour.
There's a sign as I was coming into Great Missenden on the side of the road that says the hills are alive with the sound of the HS2, which is what obviously HS2 don't want to have. But the reality is, if you've got a very tranquil environment and suddenly you hear the whoosh of a train go through, you will notice it.
What do you think of HS2's mitigation measures?
Well, if I knew in detail what they were, then I'd be able to comment in detail about that. I chair the BSI Committee for Noise Barrier Design in the UK for highways, and I'm also the lead to the European delegation for noise barriers for highways for the whole of Europe. Now, we know what quality specifications there are for highways. What we want to know from HS2 is what levels of specification, what quality levels are they designing to? Because until they're clear about that, it's very hard to assess whether they're doing anything right or not.
Are they not disclosing it, or do they not know?
But the likelihood is they don't know, because at the moment there isn't a similar group. There's only just been set up a similar European group for rail, and they're in the process of producing those specifications. So my question to them would be, you tell us how you design a barrier. I mean, we could tell you how to design a high-quality one. Let's see if you can do it too. I mean,
how do they operate these systems in Europe? What do they do?
Well, they basically start by spending a lot more money. There's a different mentality in Europe, a different culture, we all know that, but on the positive side is there is a far greener concept, and they're thinking we're prepared to put far more money into making sure that roads, rail, the intrusive noise sources are properly mitigated against, and so they put more money into it.
Well, how much more would it cost? I mean, we were talking here about a project that could cost up to, 33 billion before any building work actually takes place. I should imagine it would be a lot more than that. What would it cost extra to implement adequate soundproofing solutions? Okay,
well, without knowing the quantity of what they're putting in, let me work in terms of linear meters, okay? Now, in the UK, for a typical highway, and that would be the same for rail, they might be spending about £300 or £400 per linear meter on, say, a 3-metre high barrier, which typically would be made of wood. You can multiply that by 4 or 5 times on the continent and be looking at far higher quality systems that do the job properly. For example, if I was in an industrial estate in Dusseldorf next to a very large motorway, and in front of me was a very large, what looked like a hedge. And I thought, I didn't realise after a while that the motorway was there, and yet it was virtually the size of the M25. It's possible to do things and make them look good and reduce the noise without eradicating the environment that you're in.
Can it be done? Is it possible for these trains, up to 14 an hour, HS2 trains, 14 an hour, to go unnoticed, sound-wise, through this part of the British countryside?
Absolutely it is. It's called tunnelling. Basically...
That's an awful lot of tunnelling, isn't it? Charles, come on.
I know. But from my perspective, I come from the point of view that unless you can't tunnel, why not? Because essentially the argument has been, well, there's obviously going to be a whoosh at the ends of the tunnel if you do that. But it's possible, if you design the things properly, to encase the noise within the tunnel. But secondly, they've got to look at how they're budgeting if they keep the rail line above ground. What are the levels of cost that they're putting in for the mitigation measures? I don't know what those are. I don't know what they're putting into those. But my suspicion is they're not as high as they should be, because that's very typical at this stage of projects in the UK of this size.
Do you think they'll understand what they need to do, from your perspective, to make this as soundproof as possible?
Well, I've been training acoustic consultants in the UK for the last 15 years on noise barrier specification for highways, and what we find is the majority do not know how to design barriers. That's why they ask us to be involved. So I tend to know the ones who know how to design them. Generally, we find that there is a lack of understanding, and it boils down to the fact that the design methods in the UK for mitigating against noise, both for road and rail, are not geared to designing noise barriers in particular.